Welcome back to our channel on this beautiful day full of endless drama and shocking twists that are about to completely rewrite the history of Los Angeles. So let us dive straight into the absolute madness that is unfolding right before our very eyes. The air in the Forrester mansion was thick with a suffocating kind of silence that only comes after a massive explosion of family trauma. And Brooke Logan was pacing the hardwood floors like a caged animal whose entire reality had just been ripped apart by the very daughter she brought into this world. She could not stop thinking about that runway show where Hope glided down the catwalk wearing the House of Logan logo and the Hope for the Future diamond. And every single step Hope took felt like a dagger twisting deeper and deeper into Brooke's chest, because this was not just a business move, it was a profound personal betrayal that severed the umbilical cord once and for all. Brooke was drowning in a toxic cocktail of grief and absolute unadulterated rage that made her hands shake and her vision blur as she wandered through the empty rooms of her home where she had just kicked Hope and Liam out onto the streets because she simply could not bear to look at the face of a traitor anymore. What kind of daughter does this to her mother? What kind of child looks at the legacy her family built and just throws it in the trash for a shiny new contract with the competition? Brooke was spiraling into a dark psychological abyss where logic goes to die and all that remains is the burning desire to inflict the exact same amount of pain that she was currently feeling. She needed to do something, anything. She needed to prove that nobody crosses Forrester Creations and gets away with it, not even her own flesh and blood. It was during this manic state of pacing and ruminating that Brooke found herself digging through the boxes and bags that Hope had hastily packed when she was evicted from the property, and that is when she saw them. The sketches, the original design sketches that Hope had quietly and illegally sneaked out of the Forrester Creations building before she made her grand defection to Katie's rival company. Brooke's breath caught in her throat as her trembling fingers traced the graphite lines and the meticulous notes scribbled in the margins because she knew exactly what she was looking at. This was intellectual property. This was the lifeblood of Forrester Creations, stolen right out from under their noses by the very woman who was supposed to be the moral compass of the family. Did Hope really think she could just pack up proprietary designs and walk out the door without anyone noticing? Did she honestly believe that the rules of corporate espionage did not apply to her just because her last name was Logan? Brooke stared at the papers and a cold, terrifying clarity washed over her because she suddenly realized that she was holding the ultimate weapon in her hand. She was holding the exact piece of evidence that could destroy the House of Logan before it even got off the ground. She could burn it all down. She could take these sketches and use them to teach her daughter a lesson that she would never, ever forget. Brooke did not even hesitate because the betrayal had hardened her heart into a solid block of ice, and she marched straight into the Forrester Creations executive office where Carter Walton was buried under a mountain of legal documents, trying to figure out how to mitigate the damage of Hope's secret leave of absence. Carter looked up in absolute shock when Brooke slammed the manila folder down on his desk with a deafening thud that echoed off the glass walls of the boardroom. He opened the folder and his legal mind immediately started racing as he saw the stolen sketches, because this was no longer just a family feud or a breach of contract issue. This was a full-blown criminal offense, copyright infringement, theft of intellectual property, corporate espionage on a grand scale. Carter knew exactly what this meant, and he looked at Brooke with a mixture of awe and sheer terror because he realized that a mother was actively handing over the evidence needed to put her own daughter behind bars. How could she do this? How could Brooke cross this unimaginable line? But Brooke just stood there with eyes as dead and cold as a winter night, and she told Carter to do whatever he had to do to protect the company. She was choosing Forrester. She was choosing the legacy. She was choosing Ridge and Eric and the empire over the daughter who had humiliated her on live television. Steffy Forrester practically vibrated with a vindictive, terrifying energy when she walked into the office and saw what Carter was looking at, because this was the exact legal weapon she had been praying for ever since she watched Hope walk down that Logan runway. Steffi had been sharpening her knives and declaring war against Hope and Katie and Bill, but she never in a million years expected Brooke Logan, of all people, to hand her the guillotine. Steffi looked at Brooke, and for the first time in their incredibly messy history, there was a silent, twisted understanding between them because they were both women scorned by Hope's actions, and they were both willing to do whatever it took to exact their revenge. Steffi immediately ordered Carter to finalize the prosecution file for copyright infringement, and she wanted it done yesterday. She wanted the charges filed. She wanted the authorities involved. She wanted to completely obliterate Hope's new career and drag the House of Logan through the mud until there was nothing left but dust and regret. Steffi relished every single second of this process, dictating the terms of the legal assault, while Carter frantically typed up the documents that would seal Hope's fate. The Forrester machine was moving at lightning speed, and there was absolutely no stopping it now. Meanwhile, over at the glamorous new House of Logan offices, the atmosphere was completely different because everyone was still riding the massive high of their successful fashion launch, and the champagne was flowing, and the press was buzzing, and Hope was finally feeling like she was stepping out of the Forrester shadow and into her own light. Katie was beaming with pride as she looked at her niece, thinking about how they had just pulled off the ultimate coup and how Bill's aggressive marketing strategies were paying off in spades. Hope was laughing and looking over fabric swatches with Deke Sharp, completely oblivious to the massive legal hurricane that was currently barreling toward their front door. She felt safe here. She felt validated and appreciated, and she honestly believed that the worst of the fallout was over now that she had moved into the Spencer estate and ripped the Band-Aid off. Was she naive? Absolutely. Did she underestimate the sheer ruthlessness of the people she left behind? Without a doubt. Hope thought she could just walk away and start fresh, but she forgot that in this industry and in this family, nobody ever just walks away without leaving a trail of blood behind them. The heavy glass doors of the Logan office suddenly swung open with a violent force that shattered the celebratory mood in an instant, and the room went dead silent as a team of uniformed police officers marched into the reception area with their badges flashing under the bright studio light. The heavy thud of their boots on the pristine marble floor sounded like a death knell, and everyone just froze in a state of absolute bewildered panic. Hope dropped the fabric swatches she was holding, and the colorful silk pooled around her feet like spilled paint as she stared at the officers trying to process what was happening. Katie immediately stepped forward, demanding to know what was going on and asserting her authority as the head of the company, but the lead officer did not even blink as he pulled out a stack of legal documents and announced that they were there to serve arrest warrants. Arrest warrants? The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Hope felt the blood drain from her face as the officer read out the charges of grand theft and severe copyright infringement regarding proprietary designs stolen from Forrester Creations. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare as the officers moved in and actually pulled out handcuffs, and the cold metal clicking around Hope's delicate wrists sounded like a bomb going off in the middle of the room. Hope was hyperventilating, her eyes darting around wildly as she tried to make sense of this absolute catastrophe, because this could not be happening. This had to be some kind of sick joke or a misunderstanding. Katie was screaming at the officers, telling them they had no right to do this and that her lawyers would have their badges, but the police simply grabbed Katie's arms as well and placed her under arrest as a co-conspirator in the theft of intellectual property. The glamorous House of Logan had instantly been transformed into a crime scene, and the sheer public humiliation of being perp-walked through their own building was a trauma that would scar them for the rest of their lives. Hope was sobbing, now the tears ruining her makeup, as she begged anyone to explain how Forrester got the evidence, how they could possibly prove this when she had been so careful to hide the sketches in her personal belongings. And that is when the crowd of stunned employees parted and Brooke Logan stepped out of the shadows like a grim reaper draped in designer clothing. Hope stopped crying for a fraction of a second and just stared at her mother because her brain simply could not compute what she was seeing. Brooke was standing there with her arms crossed, and her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated stone. There was no maternal warmth in her eyes. There was no pity. There was only the cold, hard reality of a woman who had completely detached herself from her own child. Hope looked at her mother, and the devastating realization hit her with the force of a freight train. Brooke did this. Brooke found the sketches. Brooke went to the police. Her own mother, the woman who gave birth to her, the woman who was supposed to protect her from the monsters of the world, had just become the biggest monster of them all. Hope's voice cracked into a pathetic, agonizing whisper as she asked her mother why she would do something so unbelievably cruel. How could a mother push her own daughter into the arms of the law? How could she stand there and watch her child be treated like a common criminal? Brooke did not flinch. She did not shed a single tear as she looked at her daughter in handcuffs, and she delivered a speech that was so incredibly cold and calculated that it sent shivers down the spines of every single person in that room. Brooke declared that this was a necessary lesson in loyalty. She said that actions have consequences and that stealing from the family that fed you and clothed you and gave you a name was the ultimate sin, and that this arrest was simply the punishment for a traitor. A traitor. She called her own daughter a traitor right to her face while the police tightened the cuffs. Brooke's words were like bullets tearing through the very fabric of their relationship, shredding every single memory of love and support they had ever shared. She told Hope that she had made her bed and now she had to lie in it, and that Forrester Creations would not be made a fool of by a spoiled, ungrateful child who thought she was above the law. The absolute finality in Brooke's voice was terrifying. There was no coming back from this. This was not a fight over a boy or a disagreement over a dress design. This was the total and complete annihilation of the mother-daughter bond. The relationship between Brooke and Hope was completely shattered into a million irreparable pieces right there on the floor of the Logan office. Katie could not stay silent for another second, and she erupted into a volcanic screaming match that shook the very foundation of the building. Katie was thrashing against the police officers, her face red with absolute fury as she screamed at her sister, calling Brooke a cold-blooded sociopath who would destroy her own flesh and blood just to score points with Ridge. Forrester? Katie's voice was raw and guttural as she accused Brooke of being a monster, of being dead, inside of sacrificing her own daughter on the altar of the Forrester Empire. The sisterly feud that had been simmering for decades had finally exploded into a nuclear war, and Katie swore right then and there that she would never, ever forgive Brooke for this horrific betrayal. She screamed that Brooke was sick in the head, that she was a pathetic shell of a woman who only cared about her husband's approval, and that she was dead to the Logan family forever. Brooke just stood there and absorbed the screaming without a single ounce of regret, because in her twisted mind, she was the victim here. She was the one who had been wronged, and she was just balancing the scales of justice. The news of the arrest spread through Los Angeles like a horrific wildfire, and when it finally reached the ears of Bill Spencer, the entire city practically trembled in fear, because Dollar Bill was not a man who took attacks on his family lightly. Bill had been sitting in his office at Spencer Publications, basking in the glory of the Logan launch, when the phone call came in, and the moment he heard that Katie and Hope had been arrested and that Brooke was the one who orchestrated it, a dark, lethal shadow fell over his face. Bill's eyes went completely black with rage, and he slammed his fist down on his desk so hard that the wood splintered and cracked. He had taken Hope and Liam in. He had provided the funding. He had built this sanctuary for them, and now the Forresters were trying to rip it all away, using the police as their personal attack dogs. Bill paced his office like a predatory cat, his mind racing with 1,000 different ways to inflict maximum casualties on the Forrester family. This was no longer just a fashion rivalry. This was a blood feud. Bill swore out loud to the empty room that he was going to make the Forrester family pay dearly for this action. He was going to unleash every single ounce of his wealth and power and influence to destroy them. He was going to bury Forrester Creations under a mountain of lawsuits and scandals that would make this copyright infringement charge look like a parking ticket. He was going to personally ensure that Brooke Logan suffered for what she did to his Katie and to Hope. Bill's protective instincts were in overdrive, and he was ready to cross every single legal and ethical boundary to get revenge. He grabbed his coat and stormed out of the building, a one-man army marching toward a war that was going to leave a trail of destruction so massive that nobody in this town would ever be the same again. The battle lines were not just drawn, they were carved into the earth with fire and blood. And as Hope and Katie were loaded into the back of a police cruiser, the entire landscape of their lives shifted into a dark, terrifying new reality where family means nothing and vengeance is the only currency that matters anymore.